Welcome everyone for today's session. And I would like to introduce today's speaker, Mr. Alok Agrawal, who is a CA and a CFA. Alok is a senior fund manager with PGIM India Asset Management Private Limited. And Alok manages PGIM India Large Cap Fund, PGIM India Hybrid Equity Fund, and PGIM India Equity Saving Fund. So Alok is going to talk about market overview, and we have our second speaker, Mr. Rakesh Pillai. Rakesh is a zonal head, retail sales south for PGIM India Asset Management Private Limited. He has over 17 years of experience in financial services industry, and Rakesh is going to give insight on asset allocation.
Yeah, thank you, Akash, and good morning, all. Welcome to this webinar, and thanks for taking time out. I'll try to cover what's happening globally and locally, and this is a very special kind of a year where a lot of different kind of events have happened, and how to position in the markets. Uh, Coming to the COVID, because this is the most important event around us in these times, and it's in our face eventually, not just in any part of the world, and before we look at the impact of COVID, it is very important to understand that how it is different from other crises that we had, and what was the position of our country and global side when this hit us. So in India, we had the first lockdown coming in the last week of March. But the fact remains that India was already slowing down at the time of this pandemic hitting us. So right with us slowing down, that is, our nominal GDP growth had already gone to multi-year lows. For more than 8, 9 quarters, we had single-digit nominal GDP growth. Even till I'm talking about till December, March numbers are still there, and even till March we had, including March, we had around 10 quarters of single-digit nominal GDP growth, which was quite a small number. The industrial production number for the full year FY20 itself was on the negative side, which happened for the first time in 40 years. So our economy was not going great guns at the time of getting hit. So that's why the impact becomes little more. The global side as well, the slowdown was there globally, but we were seeing some green shoots both globally and locally that yes, things may start picking up. But this hitting the global side as well as our country, that people were forced to take lockdowns. So some countries took a higher level of lockdown. Some countries took little more relaxed version of lockdown. In our country, we had a very strict lockdown, and since what last week of March till now, the lockdown is on. Slowly, since the 1st of June, unlocking is happening in a segment by segment. But yet, for many parts of the society and many parts of the country, especially the main cities, there is an at least, if not fully, then the considerable amount of lockdown is still there. As a result, the June quarter numbers are likely to be pathetic numbers. So, be it the GDP number or be it the corporate earnings numbers, most corporates who have reported numbers so far in the March quarter, a lot of them got impacted because last week of March is a very important week for majority of the manufacturers. A lot of inventory buildup happens at the dealer level, and those things couldn't happen in the last week of March. That was a very critical week to get impacted, and you saw the March quarter numbers to be poor. The June quarter numbers are likely to be much worse. The question here is then when I'm starting off by saying that the economic growth was slow before the hit, and obviously takes a big downturn because of this COVID hit. And how come the markets are running? So there are two different parts. Let's cover the economic part first, and let's come to the market second. The fact remains that there was a dip. But let's compare it incrementally. The kind of lockdown that we had in April, there was little more relaxation in May and far more relaxation in June. And as we progress from here on, there will be incremental relaxations. One of the key indicators that I look at as a leading indicator is the electricity consumption, because electricity cannot be stored. Primarily, electricity is either used in houses or it is used in industries. In the month of April, the electricity consumption had fallen by more than 30%, and the peak fall, it was 30% fall. But now, since April, that has started coming up, there is still a decline. The decline has now reduced to 5% decline. So, but a 30% decline, a 5% decline is definitely an improvement and shows that we are moving more towards a normal, more towards a pre-COVID era. Similarly, if you look at the e-way bill or we look at the toll collection, most of these numbers show that we are incrementally moving closer and closer to the pre-COVID era. So what market tries to do, markets are always forward looking. Markets try to judge that what's like if something is bad, first of all, how long can that be bad and how bad can it be? Similarly, if something is about to recover, how soon can it recover and how much can we have as the growth side? We, if you look at the consensus numbers or even the IMF numbers that were released 2 days ago, FY21, that this financial year that we are in, the GDP growth rate is estimated to be anywhere between -4 to -6. That's where the consensus estimate is. IMF spoke about -4.5%. Even if we take the ballpark number as -5%, so nobody is really expecting a positive GDP growth this year. But if I were to break up into quarters, the worst quarter will be the June quarter. The September quarter will be better than the June quarter, and December quarter will be better than the September quarter. So majority of the hit, majority of the pain we are taking upfront, which is very much visible in the economic numbers as well. So that's where the markets look at. Second very important thing, markets are a function of what happens in the economy, but more than that, it is also a function of liquidity in the markets. The developed world is in a unique position. So while lockdowns were not as extensive as we had in India, but because of their developed nature, because of their AAA rating, they have much more wherewithals, much more ability to come with stimulus and come with liquidity. So that's why we saw the kind of unprecedented stimulus announced by the developed world led by the US. And that liquidity eventually finds its way into the risk assets as well, namely equities and metals as well. So that's how the markets are positioned. The fact remains, to instead of gauging as to the day-to-day movements or month-to-month movements, few things that need to be borne in mind is very clear. Good quality companies, good quality businesses are always in demand. Yes, in the time of sell-off, as we saw in March, they also get sold off. But we saw the biggest company in the country has more than doubled since March in just 2-3 months. So in March, nobody wanted it at a particular price, and not at double the price, the world is queuing up to invest in the company. So the fact remains that we need to look at good quality companies, and those companies are the first ones to be picked up whenever the recovery happens. And in good times, they are the ones that sail us through. So that's where the process of equity investing becomes extremely important. Few things that we take care of in these times and in general as well. We made a study of last 20 odd years and looked at, say, the BSE 500 companies, which is more than 97% of India's market cap, as to what are the key ingredients of the companies that became successful and what were the key ingredients of companies that were not successful. What were the common attributes? The few common attributes that we could take out of the winners. Number one was that they were very capital efficient. That means a judicious use of the capital. So on a 100 rupee capital, if somebody was to earn 5 rupees per year, that is 5% per annum, for that we don't need to do any business. So for that we don't need to do anything, because even if you put in a government security, we'll get that 5%. But on the same capital, if you need to earn 10%, 12%, 15%, that requires a business that has some competitive advantages. And companies which have competitive advantages are the ones that become capital efficient. So it's interlinked. So we looked at that companies that had competitive advantages had some kind of pricing power also, some kind of brand power also, and they were very capital efficient. I'll give you an example. The leading consumer company in the country, which is there in Nifty, the likes of HUL and Nestle, their ROE, the return on equity, is in excess of 60-70%. While most other cyclicals, etc., they struggle at 10-15%, 10% or so, these companies are at 60-70%. That explains why they trade at such expensive valuations. First of all, their growth rates have been good, reasonably good. They never show 30, 40, 50% growth, but they show a steady rate of growth, but for over a long period of time. But more importantly, they have those competitive advantages of being in segments. Sorry. being in segments and being leaders in those segments where these consumer companies are there, and being extremely capital efficient. So that was one first hallmark. Second hallmark that we found was, if you were to look at in last 20 years, can you name any company that became 4 times or 5 times or maybe 10 times despite having debt equity ratio of more than 3 times? It's very difficult. Hardly any company which has become, when I say 4 times in 20 years, that is negligible. That's like 7% kind of annualized return. If you get 7 years of annualized return, then 20 years becomes 4 times. With a debt equity ratio of more than 3 times, there's hardly any company that could become 4 times or 5 times in last 20 years. That clearly showed that having a reasonable debt equity or a lower debt equity is a must if you want to become successful over a longer period of time. When I was also studying, one question that used to come in my mind was, if a company is earning 15% return on capital, if that company can borrow at 7-8%, on that borrowed capital of 7-8% also it will earn 15%. So that extra 7-8% is the profit of the company. So higher borrowing is good. But what happens is that every company, every sector goes through cycles. And in those cycles, there is a downturn. And in those downturns, this debt, this fixed interest payments, they come to haunt those companies and where they lose out. There were a lot of capital goods companies. This were names like Punj Lloyd. In 2006-7, they were being fitted as the next big thing. But in a downturn, their debt came back to haunt them. So the second more important part for us is the debt equity ratio. So these 2-3 parts become extremely important for us when we look at companies. Companies become extremely important for us is, do those companies have competitive advantages, and are those competitive advantages durable? And if that is the case, then we invest in those companies. Given that we need a reasonable amount of return on equity, reasonable amount of debt, and a healthy balance sheet. When you cover yourself with these parts, you are unlikely to go wrong. And that's what we have done. Our own fund, the large cap fund, is more than 17 years old. And in 17 years, the fund is up 15 times while Nifty is up 10 times. So it has delivered and it has added value over a period of time. I have not done anything which is a rocket science. I've simply stuck to this discipline of remaining with quality companies. But yes, in times like March, when things fell, you have to go back to the drawing board. And then the question that I put forward to myself was, is this COVID a small time stuff, or is it likely to impact businesses for a longer term? So the answer to that was that yes, in medium term, at least there will be an impact on at least certain companies and certain sectors, and there could be an impact on consumer behavior as well. Then the second part is those which are likely to suffer for a longer period, even if lockdowns were to end. At least in those segments, one should have very low exposure or no exposure. So we found segments like aviation, segments like travel, tourism, hotels, restaurants, multiplexes. These segments, people are bound to avoid even after the lockdown gets over, at least for the foreseeable future of say 1 year or so. We have so many people on the call. How many of us are planning a vacation in October or September when things open up, or December? Most of us will be thinking that let's postpone to the extent possible. Let's get to normal life, and then we'll look at it. That's the reason. Some of these segments, and a lot of these segments that I just mentioned, are very capital intensive in nature. So how they walk out of this crisis will be the one that we'll watch out for. And the ones who walk out as winners will be the clear ones when things become normalized. While selecting a company now and these times, and while looking at our own portfolios also, one more key question for us is, who will emerge as the winner from this crisis? Because equations have changed overnight. So something that was extremely, I'll give an example of multiplex. Multiplexes were beaming. They were so good, and so many movies coming in, and it was a lot of times for big movies, sometimes it was difficult to get your preferred seat or preferred show also. Suddenly, people have started moving towards OTT, especially because of lack of options. For these things and for many other products, there is a shift in consumer behavior. And we need to see that which are the companies that are likely to emerge as winners. Similarly, if you look at financials in the lender space, some of them were running very close book, a very tight book, a very book which was slightly on a riskier side. Those books will come into question, will be tried out now as to whether they will be able to finance or not. Interestingly, lot of them did not keep much liquidity with them. Suddenly, with the moratorium, the loans that they have given, they are not coming back quickly, but they have to honor their own bonds and payments. So those who were running the business in a more calculated manner, the more defensive manner, slightly more conservative manner, are the ones who are likely to emerge as winners, and that's why we are focusing our attention there. But those which are at risk of collapsing, they may not collapse, but those who are at risk of collapsing are the ones that we will want to avoid. So one new variable that has come to us is that who will emerge as winner in these times. One more part that has happened is there's a lot more usage of technology that was there compared to what was there earlier. Look at us, we are talking on a webinar right now. Maybe a year ago, we were not doing as many webinars altogether, all of us. So there were webinars, but less number of it. But now we are all getting used to new modes of communication, new modes of meeting, and new modes of conducting our own life. All these things are bound to have impact. I spoke about the one that will have negative impact. Let me speak about something that will have a positive impact because of this. We, all of us, haven't our consumption of internet more than doubled in the last few months? The ones who benefit out of this are the likes of those telecom companies. That's why you're seeing the biggest company in the country has almost doubled in 3 months. So those companies, because of the digitization of the whole country, where COVID has actually become a catalyst. We were already digitizing, but COVID came as a catalyst and has sped up the whole thing. Those companies are beneficiaries of it. Similarly, in financials, if certain weak companies face problems, we saw in the last 8-9 years when PSU banks, which is 2/3 of the banking system in terms of banking loans, when PSU banks faced problems, private banks gained share because of their problems. Now within those private banks of NBFCs also, if the weaker ones face problems, the stronger ones will gain market share at the expense of the weaker ones. So our idea is to stay with those stronger ones. Same habit changes are we are seeing. We are seeing some of the consumer companies also reacting to it. A lot of consumer companies have understood that the need for sanitizers has gone up, the need for immunity building kind of stuff has gone up. Those are reacting to those changes and adjusting themselves so that they are able to better provide their own customers. So the companies that are likely to adjust to the new norm and yet deliver are the ones that will come out as winners. So this is a simpler way of how we look at portfolios. We look at several companies who burn cash. We look at so many startups, unlisted, obviously. We see startups who are burning cash. We don't like such business models. You got to grow, but growth at the expense of losing money is not the growth that we look at. We look at growth with structural competitive advantages. Advantages can be of any form. Let me take an example which is not in India. I'll take it a little bit from the history side. If you go back 30, maybe 40 years back, the only car available in India was Ambassador. And Ambassador was such that you had to book and wait for months. It's difficult to imagine that in those days, you couldn't even choose your car color. You just book a car and you get that car. That's it. It's so difficult to imagine now. When Maruti came in, Maruti changed that concept. From a big bulky Ambassador, they had this Maruti 800. Nuclear family boom was happening in India. They stuck to that change. And suddenly you had a fancier looking car, more sleek, various color options, lighter in feel, better on the pocket, and several parts started moving in its favor. Maruti disrupted the automobile industry at that time with its innovative thinking, which adjusted to what the customer wanted. Because it was having a healthy balance sheet and cash flow, also it made for a very good investment. Fast forward it to these times, today every second car sold in India is a Maruti. But if you look at the global side, on the global side, the new norm that is coming up is more towards electric vehicles. In India, we have very limited presence of electric vehicles. It will take longer time for India to get accustomed to electric vehicles. But globally, the one innovation that is disrupting this automobile industry is the electric vehicles. And the leader in that is Tesla. So that's why, although Tesla is not something that we can invest in, we are obviously investing in Indian economy, but our global fund, so our global equity opportunities fund invests in companies like this, which are there globally. Tesla sees that opportunity not just in US, but also in China. Such kind of competitive advantages also come from network effects. An Amazon kind of a company that offers that kind of network effects. All of us have used Amazon either for shopping and or for Amazon Video or for music. Those kind of network effects come in. I'll give you a very interesting incident about Amazon. While Amazon, even a few years back when we used to look at Amazon, we used to build on how much revenue it can earn from those shopping apps, how much revenue possibly can come from the cloud apps. But you know what has surprised us? The amount of revenue and profit that they are being able to generate on the cloud services, we did not imagine that the world will digitize at such a fast pace. And one area of revenue that was difficult to even imagine was that Amazon could have such big stream of ad revenues. So when you have a very strong network, sometimes new streams of revenue comes in, which is difficult to imagine initially. I mean, you're giving this example of network effects because Geo platforms is almost on the similar lines. It is that platform effect, a network effect. So right now, on the Geo platform, you have various apps, telecom, and the video streaming, audio streaming. Very soon, the Geo Mart will also be linked to it. So that's the network effect that is being created, and that adds to a very, very important competitive advantage. The biggest advantage of that is it is difficult to replicate. There are such big entry barriers that it is difficult to replicate such a model. So we look at such models, and where it is difficult to replicate that model, or the brand power is so superior that it is difficult for anybody else to come in and snatch the business or the profits. So these are the similar examples that we had, that how we structure the portfolios and the kind of companies that we like. But coming to the markets, it is no brainer now. In hindsight, all of us know that March was the greatest opportunity to put money, and the fact remains that way. I think most of you, and at least myself, none of us could have imagined that there could be such a steep or sharp rally from the March. I was convinced there will be a rally from March, because that kind of sharp fall, a lot of companies had come to an valuation area that we had never seen. And HDFC Bank P ratio went below Nifty P ratio for the first time since its listing. I have never seen in 20 years that HDFC Bank's P ratio goes below Nifty P ratio. So when such kind of things happen and such quality names are being available at thrown away prices, obviously that will be picked up and rally was bound to happen. But whether this rally would be so sharp, it's difficult to say. Whether there can be correction from here on, let me take that question head on. Can there be a correction from here on? Nobody knows that there can be a correction. Corrections are part and parcel of the markets. Is it a good time to invest? I would say yes, it is always a good time to invest in quality companies. I would not really say that a poor quality company, just because it has fallen 50%, one should buy it. No. The idea is a good quality company should always be accumulated. And when a good quality company falls sharply, the way we saw in Feb March, at that time, we should try to accumulate at a faster pace if possible. So that's what my sense is. Have a portfolio of very good quality companies. Typically in our large cap fund, we try to do that, ensure that we have leaders of every space, those with very clear competitive advantages, clear moats in their businesses, which enables them to gain market share and have healthy balance sheets. Ensure you have a portfolio of such good companies and keep allocating to such portfolios. The portfolio is only built over time. Corrections would come in, but how we should invest, your advisors will be the best one to advise you on that. But typically in corrections, one should add on to the equity exposure. When there's only a sharp rally and valuations go haywire, that's the time we look at reducing equities. Having spoken that, India's market cap to GDP. See, I'm using market cap to GDP because earnings growth numbers are all over the place currently. Market cap to GDP is a famous metric that has been used by the legendary Warren Buffett. India's market cap to GDP right now is at 63%. So India's market cap is 63% of India's GDP. Our long-term average is 85%. So even now, we are getting India's market at a 25% discount to its historical averages. US, which is doing very well, US market cap to GDP is sitting at nearly 150%. That is all-time high for India. So that is 150%. India is 63%. The moment there's more sanity in the capital allocators globally, they'll realize the country that is going to grow fastest for the next 10, 20 years, if that is available at such a discount, things will be picked up quickly. And at that time, as investors, we may not be able to respond. So my suggestion is very simple. Use these opportunities in the market. Yes, the markets have, if you look from bottom, we are valued about 30%, but if we look from peak, we are still 20% below the peak. So use these market opportunities to add companies which are high quality companies. Never compromise on quality. Valuation of a quality company is never cheap. Asian Paints PE ratio has never gone below Nifty PE ratio. Never. So you do not get a quality company which is cheap. The idea is, are you sure it's a quality company? If it's a quality company, go ahead and keep it in the portfolio. And the better way to do that is ensure that you are investing in a mutual fund scheme which invests in good quality companies and is not just investing in poor quality names just for the sake of price. So that's what our sense, in a simple sum up about the equity markets and the way we are positioned. That's what my thoughts were. I'll pass on to Rakesh, and then we can have question answers. I'll try to take the questions then.
Quick brief about PGIM and then probably dive into the presentation as well. So, we take immense pride in saying that we are probably the largest global asset management player that's present in India today. So PGIM stands for Prudential Global Investment Managers. And when you hear the name Prudential, I'm sure most of you might probably be thinking that, so how are these guys different from ICICI Prudential? Well, there is a lot of difference. Both of them are totally different firms. The Prudential of PGIM is the Prudential of the US. We are one of America's oldest life insurance companies, and when I say oldest, we are almost a century and a half old. We're close to 140 years of existence in the space of insurance. So by DNA at heart, we are basically a life insurance firm. And PGIM, which is Prudential Global Investment Managers, is a 100% subsidiary of Prudential of the US. Whereas the Prudential of ICICI is a UK listed entity, and that is based out of UK and operates in many parts of the world. So that's the first difference between Prudential of the US and Prudential of the UK, and we are Prudential of the US. In terms of our size, purely, there are only 10 asset management firms in the world that manage close to $1 trillion and above, and we are the 7th largest asset management firm amongst the 10, and the only one from the top 10 to be present in India today in a 100% owned entity. So we are 100% owned and operated by Prudential of the US. So when I say we have $1.5 trillion in size, that's almost 97 lakh crores of assets under management around the world. The Indian mutual fund industry is 25 lakh crores thereabout. So we are almost 2.5 times the size of the total Indian mutual fund industry. So that's how large we are. We've been present in India for the last 10 years, and probably the only asset management firm on the global scale that's been present in India for the last 10 years. So these are all some of the most, confident building aspects from our end. And as you can see, the logo of PGIM is actually the Rock of Gibraltar, which in itself symbolizes, strength in many ways. And that's the logo. If you just want to have a quick understanding of that as well. So with that, in India, we are, like I said, we're 10 years. We have a host of, different offerings that we have. I'm sure OptiMoney and team will be the best, people to take you all through it. We offer solutions where we have SIPs with insurance. We are only among 4 AMCs that are providing SIPs with default life insurance covers all the way up to 50 lakh. So any SIP that you do with PGIM India automatically gets you a life insurance term, right from day zero. That's something which is very unique. We are probably only amongst 4 asset management firms that are offering you a truly international equity fund, that's available to invest. Like Alok said in his presentation, ideas like Tesla, Amazon, Facebook, Alphabet are great ideas, and obviously as Indians, we do not get opportunities to invest in that as much as we get domestic equity. So that's like a great opportunity. So that's something which is very unique. We have a very unique asset allocation solution, which moves between debt and equity, something which I'm sure, the OptiMoney team will take you all through as well. So I will dive into my presentation, and my presentation is about asset allocation, and I've titled it, as a journey from goal to accomplishment. And the reason I've done that is because anything that we do, I think, has to have a goal at the core of it, and then the journey from the goal to the accomplishment is probably what defines, the whole. The whole success of what you've kind of decided for oneself. So that's why I've titled it a journey from goals to accomplishment. So I'll start with this simple 2 quotes, and I like these quotes very much. And I've put a small photograph of small image on the side, which is basically typically the directions that all of us as investors think through. What's the scenario? Which is the scenario? What are the extremes? What are the trends? Which model is good? What is the priority? Which are the priorities? So on and so forth. So if the first thing I think, and that's the first quote is from Ray Dalio, who talks about his quote is something like this. I think the first thing is you should have an asset allocation mix that assumes that you don't know what the future is going to hold. And Ray Dalio is the chairman and co-founder of Bridgewater, one of the famous investment firms. A lot of good books that he has written. One of them is the book on principles, which is a fantastic book to read. And the second one is by Harry Markowitz, who is a Nobel Prize winner. And he has said that a good portfolio is more than a long list of stocks and bonds. It is a balanced whole, providing the investor with protection, opportunities with respect to a wide range of contingencies. And I think in both these, the reason I put both these quotes here is that both these quotes have something in common. One is that the future is uncertain. In many ways, because I think in December and Jan, I think we will not even be talking about COVID, because it is absolutely not even in the background. And then suddenly come March, April, and May, and we all are looking and running it, into different kinds of scenarios, because we really don't know what the future is going to be looking forward. So it's extremely important that when you do asset allocation, you must probably be able to factor in the very simple aspect that the future is something that none of us can predict. So what is an asset allocation? I think as human beings, what is most important for us is we are rational human beings in everything that we do, But I think when it comes to decision making, there are certain elements of irrationality that really pop up. And when it comes to decision making in investments, I think the irrational side of a human being completely takes over the rational side. And when I say the irrational side, I clearly mean to say, just like how Alok had quoted, you had the HDFC stock, which was trading at a PE level below the Nifty for the first time in its history. And how many of us would have actually gone in and bought an HDFC Bank at that point of time? I think some of us would have really thought that, okay, let HDFC drop a little further, I will buy. And some of us wouldn't have even known that the HDFC PE was available at that kind of valuation. So the asset allocation clearly takes away the irrational side of the human aspect, and then starts, putting rationality into the thought and the action. The second aspect of asset allocation is, it's a priority that an individual and an advisor basically gives to risk over return. I think as Indians, most of us have probably been used to seeing, FD rates in the range of 13-14% in the, early 90s and early 2000s, and then as you start seeing the interest rates coming down, and then people who've invested in equities have probably seen returns like 15-16% for long periods of time. So we're always used to talking about returns, and we always define our investment objectives with the returns that we want to get out of what we put money into. But I think what is most important is risk more important or is return more important? I think that's a question that all of us need to answer. All of us need to be sitting with advisors and asking, so what is the purpose of my investment? Is it first to protect, to protect the investment that I make and then subsequently make return, or am I okay with taking any sort of risk and then getting the return? So I think the simple answer to that is the precedence of risk over the return in the long run is what enables you to kind of make your investments grow. I think there are enough and more examples in day-to-day life right in front of us, where we probably have chosen a slightly better, I mean, riskier investment at the cost of saying that, okay, fine, I think this will probably be a multi-bagger in 5, 6, 7 years, and then let me get into it. And some of the best names in the Nifty that were there 5, 7, 8 years ago, today we don't even discuss about them. So that's the kind of dynamism with which risk and return exist. So it's most important to give a risk priority, and if your risk gets addressed, I think your return anyways will follow it. And asset allocation, to me, the most simplest way I have defined it is a mix of investment that starts from the most aggressive investment to the most safest investment. So at any point of time, you must have some sort of an aggressive investment in your portfolio. You must have some sort of an investment which probably has a mediocre risk return parameter, and then something which probably even gives you a bit of solid, a bit of solidity as well as far as your portfolio is concerned. And to this, I take a very important analogy, and that's with cricket, because I think a lot of people, a lot of Indians are very passionate about cricket. So, if I were to ask you that, how many of you would like a team which has one Virat Kohli? I think all of you will put your hands up, because everybody needs a Virat Kohli in the team. If I were to ask you how many of you like a Virat Kohli number 2 in the team, the second Virat Kohli in the team, again, you will put your hands up. And even for the third Virat Kohli, you still put your hands up. But if I were to ask you that, do you want 11 Virat Kohlis in the team? I'm sure your answer would be no. Because then who would do the bowling? Who would do the wicket keeping? Who would do the fielding? And then you're left with an answer which is clearly emerging as the fact that you cannot have, superior performers alone in your portfolio, because not all superior performers will emerge as the best ones. It's important to have a balance, and which is exactly what asset allocation, advocates. Asset allocation advocates that you must have a mix of portfolio that is spread across the an aggressive asset all the way down up to the most conservative asset as well. So that's the next slide, and I'm just getting into. I'm sorry, I'm just taking a little time. Yeah. So the next slide is basically about buckets. I think what is most important is when we talk about portfolios and asset allocation, it's not just about equities and bonds. I think equity. I think broadly asset allocation has close to 7 varieties. I think you have equities at the topmost, which includes mutual funds and shares. You have debt and fixed income, which again includes mutual funds, bonds, and FDs. You have commodities, which includes gold and others like silver, crude, copper. You have real estate, I think, which a lot of Indians are very passionate about, in which you can basically have hard assets and REITs. Currencies, which basically have mutual funds again and direct trades. Cash, which includes your savings account, cash in hand, and mutual funds again. And then you have the last one, which is alternatives, which I'm sure is more towards the high net worth individual category, which typically looks at very unique investments like art, art funds, hedge funds, and probably even AIF, in some way. But I would probably draw your attention in this particular slide that whether it is equities, whether it is debt, whether it is currencies, and whether it is cash, in all these 4, you have mutual funds as the most common factor. So which practically means that one could actually look at mutual fund as an investment vehicle that could potentially be used for all the 4 asset classes to be participating. The next slide is basically a picture of the Indian household, and this I have basically taken it, and I'm sure if you were to sit down with your advisor, or even probably draw out your own pie chart of how your average household savings looks like, close to 90%, of your average household savings would either be in FDs, would be in cash or currency, would be in deposits, some bit of life insurance, and the remaining in provident fund, which is also a very, very compulsory portion for many of us who work in the private sector as well. But if you look at equities and others, they are only forming just about 9-10% of an average Indian household savings pie chart, which is a clear indication that broadly as investors, or broadly as savers, let me not say use the word investors, I think broadly as savers, we're pretty much used to tagging the line of just sticking to, very, very safe havens in terms of currencies and cash and deposits and bonds, because we believe that that's something that can, kind of give you the bedrock of, solidity when it comes to safety. But if I go to the next slide, I'm just moving to the next slide. Yeah. And if I were to take that 70, 80 or 85 odd percent, which is sitting in fixed income across all average Indian households, and we all know. So this is a chart that talks about the FD return broadly, the bank FD return that we talked about, and I've just taken an inflation adjusted return which is post inflation. And if you look at periods like 7 years and 10 years, the average post inflation return is probably in the lowest of single digits, anywhere between 2.5% over a 7-year period to about 0.8% in a 10-year period. While let's say you had a fixed income instrument that was probably growing at 8.5% on an average, I think the last 10-year inflation in India is alone close to about 7.5%, which clearly goes to show that fixed income is important to have as an asset allocation. But is that probably something that warrants 85% of your portfolio? The answer is no. Because I think if your 85% of the portfolio is not going to be beating inflation over the long term, you're pretty much probably going to be equivalent to probably your inflation, your inflation adjusted money, which means that your 100 rupees will probably be equivalent to inflation adjusted money over longer periods, and you really don't beat it. And your wealth creation typically happens only when you are able to beat inflation and generate that incremental return that can make a difference to the portfolio. The next aspect of asset allocation, the next asset class that which is probably very, very close to Indians, is gold and real estate. While there is still no authentic information that's available on hard assets as far as real estate is concerned, gold, of course, has reasonably good amount of chart. So I've just plotted a little bit of the gold chart from a period of 2007 to 2020. 2019, so to say. And if you look, I would definitely say that gold is very important to have in your portfolio because, as Alok said, it acts as a very good hedge against inflation. I think the classic example would be 2019 and 20. I think when the entire equity markets came tumbling down, I think gold has moved up by 25%. You see years like 2008, if you can see in the chart, and right here, these are times when equity markets were obviously going through a very, very rough patch, and you again see gold providing probably 20% plus kind of returns. 2013 was a phase when you basically started to see equity markets up, and that's probably one place where gold did register some sort of a negative return. But by and large, what I mean to say is gold is one aspect of your portfolio which you must definitely have. There are multiple ways to invest in gold. You can have gold ETFs. You have dedicated gold mutual funds that can be invested, which is of course all in the electronic form, and it is nothing but simply tracking the price of gold, and which is a very effective way to build a portfolio as well. Real estate, tough to call because there's a lot of risk. I think now with COVID, which has hit us in the most severe manner, I think right from US all the way up to China and India, you have countries which are talking about the fact that commercial real estate will probably be taking a bit of a beating. We did read in the news that India's largest IT company is now deciding to have almost 75% of its workforce to be operating from homes by 2025. So there are definitely pros and cons with real estate, but I think what is the most important thing is liquidity. I think in real estate, when you deal, you have problems with titles, you have problems with project delays, and how many of us would have ever been able to sell a flat just in the nick of time when we wanted liquidity at all? So real estate probably important, but if you ask me whether it is required to be as a part of an asset allocation, I would say probably you can probably give it not more than 5-10% weightage because that can be a part of your overall wealth, but it cannot be a part of your asset allocation as such. Of course, gold can be. The next one is the next slide is so the next slide potentially comes to equities, and this is an asset class which has globally been proven to be something which is very, very strong. I call this the rock bed because it is the only asset class in the world that has historically beaten inflation consistently over long periods of time. This is the only asset class. And to me, equity is such an important aspect to have in a client's portfolio, because today, if there is an idea, like Alok said in his presentation, to have Maruti that was, you know, that was probably the first entrant into automobile space after Hindustan Motors to come out with something like a compact car. And they were people who revolutionized the small car concept in India. He mentioned about Tesla, which is now probably going to be the changing future of the world. And if you were to capture the growth of electric vehicle segment around the world, I mean, the best way to capture it is to invest in equities, and the best way to capture Tesla is to probably invest in the stock of Tesla, because that's exactly going to be reflective of the kind of growth that can come out because of a structural change in the behavior pattern of consumers. Amazon, I think 15 years, 10 years ago, why even 15? 10 years ago, I think probably not even 5% of us would have had Amazon, or 10% of us would have Amazon in our mobile app. I think today practically every urban Indian, I can tell you, will definitely have Amazon in the mobile app. We'll have a Netflix for sure. In the last 3 months, I think Netflix has definitely taken precedence, because we don't have the PVRs and the INOX of the world where we can go and watch movies. Now, these are great ideas, probably ideas that are not existing in India today, because there are no such listed companies. But definitely, equity is a space that can capture the best growth. And the chart which I've put in this particular slide clearly talks about Indian equities and how we have fared. So while you had a year like 2008, which was probably the global financial crisis, you had the next year which immediately corrected and the market moved up by close to about 70-75%. The next important aspect is that over longer periods. So if you look at typically holding periods of more than 10 or 15 years, historically equity has never delivered a negative return. Now, even if you look at the 5-year period returns of equities today, after the bounce back, it's still about 5.5%. And this is when the markets have only recovered close to about 25-30% from the fall that it has had. So the next slide, is what I talked about, which is I call this the wine in the human wallet, because of the fact that the older it gets, wine typically gets better with age, and I think equity is simply simply that wine in the human wallet, that the more you hold on to it, the more better it gets, and the more remunerative it becomes for you from a portfolio perspective. So if you this is a chart which is plotted the 5-year, 10-year, 15-year, 20-year, 25-year holding. This is basically the daily rolling returns of the BSE Sensex from 79 captured. And if you look at periods of 15 years, and so in a 10-year holding period, you'll actually see that the least return that the fund, the Sensex has given is about -3%. The average has been about 16% over a 10-year period, and the highest it has probably given is about 35%. You just extrapolate that and take it to a 5-year, 15-year period. There has never been an instance of negative return. The highest has been 28%, and the average has still been 15%. So, suffice to say that equity is something that genuinely captures the intrinsic value of any business. And I think the longer you hold on to a business which is good, strong, stable, transparent, I think the more chances that you give your money to kind of compound. I will probably bring it to a close with, the reasons why you must have an asset allocation. I think that's most important. One, it reduces investment risk. Like I said, I've just taken you past charts of gold. I've taken you past charts of bonds. I've taken you past charts of equities. Clearly, the understanding is that equities are volatile over the short term, whereas gold is probably not as volatile over the short term. But what is most important is, than putting all your money into equities and probably running the risk, like having 11 Virat Kohlis in the team, it makes important sense to kind of diversify your assets across gold, equities, currencies, some bit of real estate, go and fixed income. And so, like I said, optimizing return, because equities give you 15.5% over a 15-year period on an average. You'll have gold which typically returns you about 8-9% on an average. You'll probably have debt which will return you about 7-7.5% on an average. So a blended return from a portfolio perspective with all these put together would be anything in the range of about 10 to 11%. So I would say a 10 to 11% in a country like India, which has an average inflation of about 6.5-7%, will then mean your money is still growing at a 5% real rate of return, which is a very, very which is a very, very good number, because when your money is able to grow at 5.5% real return adjusted for inflation, I think your typically means that your money can double at a much faster rate than what it would have doubled in a typically fixed income product. I think the next is about market timing. A lot of us, many a times have stayed on the sidelines because we really don't know when is the right time to invest in equity and when is the right time to invest in gold and when is the right time to invest in debt. But I think if you have asset allocation which is laid out very beautifully, and I'm sure the best person to do that is your own financial advisor, to say how much of money should be in equity, gold, fixed income, real estate, so on, currency, so on and so forth. I think it makes your life relatively simple not to even track what is the level of the index or what's the price of gold, because asset allocation takes care of pretty much the ups and downs of the market. Tax planning, it definitely helps when you have a right asset allocation. Some of you might have slightly higher incidence of taxation, and hence having an asset allocation which is spread between equity and debt, will probably give you a better balance. The most important aspect of asset allocation is addressing your liquidity needs. Like I said, your net worth is 5 crores and 4.5 crores is in real estate, and you have a liquidity requirement of 2 crores. I'm sure that you are not definitely not going to be able to kind of liquidate your real estate at the time you want. You will have to go for a distress. Whereas you probably had 30% of that in some equity fund or some liquid fund or some gold fund. I'm sure, in 3 days, the money comes flat to your account with whatever return is there. So it obviously is a very, very important factor to keep in mind. So with this, these are the 6 broad points that I think asset allocation helps you with. And like I said, these are times right at the beginning, like what you read in Ray Dalio's quote. I think the future is something that is absolutely uncertain for you, me, and even Alok. I think if you were to ask Alok which way the market would go in 5 months from now, I think he wouldn't be in a position to say. So I think it's completely uncertain. But what we have and what we can control is where we invest. And where we invest will purely boil down to asset allocation and nothing more. And I think the best person to do that is a financial advisor. I have a personal financial advisor myself. Spent 17 years in the market. I have my own financial advisor. He guides me through what I have to do. While I know which is good and which is bad, but I think nobody is good with their own money. You have to entrust it to an advisor to do it. So with this, I will stop. That was the end of my presentation. And, with this, we will be happy to take any questions as well.
Hey, Rakesh, I'd just like to add something. And for the benefit of all, I was reminded of a small story that I heard as an audience somewhere, and applies very well to what we have spoken and summarizes everything. And just take 2 minutes in that story. So,
Sure.
there was this father who would come back in the evening in the house and start reading newspapers. So he was quite busy to find out what is the latest story, latest scandal happening, and just was busy with the newspaper, turning pages. He had a little daughter, and daughter would say, "Papa, please come play with me." But the father was far too engrossed into the newspaper. And newspapers would have stories and gossips of all kinds. So one day, some moment of brilliance was there, and the father realized that there was an idea. What he did, he saw a full page ad of a world map by some courier company. And what he did, he took that sheet, tore that sheet into multiple pieces, put the pieces on the floor, and asked the daughter that this is your jigsaw puzzle, and you solve this, and then we will play. So father was quite happy at his own brilliance, thinking that at least he must have earned 30 minutes to 60 minutes time. And to his surprise, in the next 5-10 minutes, the daughter actually put the whole jigsaw puzzle, and the world map was right. The daughter was very small. The father was shocked. How could the 5-6-year-old daughter understand which part of the world contains New Zealand or Australia or Canada, anywhere? He was shocked. So the look of shock on the father's face was there. But then the daughter said one line, and I think that one line actually captures the essence of what we were discussing today. So looking at the father who was shocked, the daughter said, "So Papa, while you were tearing that piece of paper, at the back side, there was a full page drawing of the face of a man. I was looking at that face. So when you tore that sheet apart, I don't know where New Zealand is, where Canada is, where London is, but I know where ear is, where eye is, where nose is. And then she made that incredible statement saying, Papa, I got my man right, my world became right. It applies to all of us. We get our risk right, our returns become right. We get our asset allocation right, our returns become right. We get the quality of the companies right, our portfolio becomes right. We need not pay too much attention as to what the market is doing. Tomorrow market is going to go up or down as long as we are paying attention to the right thing. I think that was a story in my mind. I thought I'll share with you all.
I'll take it up from there, Alok. Thanks for the story. I would also, if you have the right expectation, then also your returns are right.
Absolutely, absolutely.
And thanks, Rakesh, for actually explaining the whole details about asset allocation. And you used couple of times, incidentally, you used without us telling you, optimizing. So you use the word optimizing multiple times, and that's what OptiMoney stands for. So I thought I'll just add that.
Sure. No, it is very true. I think optimization is very important, as you rightly said, because a lot of us come into investing world with expectations which are I wouldn't use the word unrealistic, but I would say that it is something that we have in our mind. So there are a lot of biases when it comes to investing, and I think what is most important is if your money is growing above inflation, which itself is a challenge today, and the only and you need to have a good asset allocation mix. I think what is most important is people think that you fill it and you shut it and then you forget it. That's not how it works. You have to allocate, you have to keep reviewing, and most importantly, the asset allocation has to be right as per the requirement and liquidity of each person. I think that's what will be the defining factor for everyone.
Absolutely. And in fact, the whole educative series, what we have started with these webinars, is to understand that. And today we spoke about asset allocation, and next series, next week, which we are doing, is more on the tax optimization. So just taking this clue forward is what we are kind of creating a journey for the investors.
Sure.
Yeah. So Akash, you can take up any questions which might have or anybody can ask any questions.
I think I'm not able to see the questions here, but the host would be able to.
Yeah. So I can just read out. Okay, so I'm going to read out a few questions that are already in here. Any specific sector, Alok, that you are bullish on, and any sectors that you probably have a negative view at the moment?
I think, although I answered on the chat, but the sectors that we are bullish on, they include insurance sector, both life and general. And we are also bullish on pharma, also bullish on specialty chemicals and agrochemicals, and also on the consumer theme. The consumer theme, yes, the companies are a little expensive, but that theme is a very long drawn theme for a country like India, even for the next 10, 20 years. So these segments we are extremely positive on, and any correction we look at buying in these, overweight on each of these sectors.
Sure.
We're highly underweight on cyclicals. Cyclicals generally, you have to time the entry and the exit right. So in cyclicals, the way to play is that you time the entry and time the exit right, because they are not something that do well over longer periods of time. So, and typically they wouldn't have too many great competitive advantages or sometimes great healthy balance sheets as well. So in general, we are more underweight on the cyclicals and commodities. And a lot of them are PSU dominated energy kind of space as well. So these spaces we continue to be underweight. Currently also underweight on the NBFC space, the lender space rather. So financials will divide in two parts, the lenders and the non-lenders. So the lenders are the banks and the NBFCs, the non-lenders are the insurance and AMC kind of companies. So non-lenders, we are overweight, lenders, we are underweight, but within lenders, heavily overweight on the larger ones, which we think which will eat away the market share of the weaker ones.
Sure. I do see a question from Mr. Surendra, which is about what is an ideal mix of asset allocation. So I'll take that. So there, Mr. Surendra, there is, I would say there is nothing like an ideal mix of asset allocation. But I will probably put it this way, that as if you are in probably the early side of your earning cycle, it makes immense sense to probably be equity heavy on your portfolio, because that's the one that can actually give you the compounding effect for longer periods of time, and you're able to kind of contribute into the kitty on a consistent basis to keep allowing that money to compound. But as you keep coming towards the middle age of your portfolio, middle of your earning cycle or your earning capacity, and then you keep coming towards the end of your earning capacity, I think that equity portion has to probably gradually keep coming down, and then the it'll keep moving slowly towards probably more conservative assets like your fixed deposits, your debt mutual funds, probably some bit of gold and some bit of currency. So it'll have a mix. But the simple thumb rule, that we ideally follow is 100 minus age is what you should put into equity, and the rest of it can be then put into the other asset classes. But I think your financial advisor is probably the best person to, kind of take you through it. It's a very personalized discussion that you must have. I can definitely tell you that today I'm 40, and my portfolio is probably almost 70% in equity right now, because I believe that there is a good amount of allocation that can happen. About 20% of my money is in fixed income, which is debt, and I have about 5% in currency and 5% in gold, which is gold fund. I don't take real estate as a part of my portfolio because, frankly, I've realized with a lot of experience that it's not as easy to liquidate as when you wanted to get liquidity. So that's a part of your net worth. If somebody is asking me my net worth, I would say this is what I'm worth, but definitely not a part of my portfolio. So that's a little asset allocation mix that I can give you from my personal side. Alok, you would want to add? Yes.
No, I agree. I think it's more of a personal case-to-case thing, and your financial advisors are the best judge for that. I like to add two aspects to it. Usually, for example, two aspects that I want to add is global side and the gold side. Typically, one says that gold should be, say, closer to 5% of the portfolio. In times of uncertainty, one can have 5 to 10% in gold. So that's one area that one looks at. Second important thing that lesser attention is paid to is the allocation to global equities. See, Indian equity market, as we speak, India's market cap is less than 2.5% of global market cap. So that's it. So that means focusing only on India, we are actually ignoring the 97.5%. In Indian context, BSE 500 is 97.5% of Indian market. It is something like ignoring BSE 500 in India, something like that. Especially for people who want to send their kids out to study. Especially for those, they should definitely have a higher allocation towards global equities also, because they have a liability or an expense coming up in dollar terms. For those who do not have any such liability, they should use global equity as a platform for diversification only, the way we use for gold, etc. So I think these two important points should also be borne in mind, apart from just gold, debt and equity. So these were the papers we had.
Absolutely. I think global equity is something which is definitely something like what Alok said. We are today investing only 3% of the world's market cap, and there is a 97% outside. Which includes your Amazons, Teslas, Alphabets, Adyen's, and so many good companies in the world. Which are probably not available for us to invest. So I think that is very, very important. It gives you a natural hedge of currency, because you're investing in a dollar denominated fund. So a currency hedge automatically comes in. You're investing into more advanced markets in the world, so you get a better opportunity to participate in great equity ideas. And as Alok said, I can personally tell you that my own kids' education money is basically put into the global equity, because it is dollar hedged. And anybody who has dollar goals, for kids' education, it's a fantastic way to do it. Yes, Vikas.
Yeah, I had a question, and that question is coming as an advisor. Okay, when we are doing an asset allocation for the client, do you think there is a requirement of a hybrid fund to be put into it?
So I'll take that. See, hybrid fund, why? It's either hybrid or same proportion coming from a debt plus equity, right? So idea there is, what is the advantage of putting in a hybrid fund? If you see that advantage being realized for us, then only one should put that in a hybrid fund. So hybrid, definitely the biggest advantage is the tax advantage, because the debt portion also gets taxed as equity. I think that's the clear advantage. But to get that advantage, if we are losing out on the quality, one should not take that call. So quality is both on equity and debt. On equity side, see, one who invests in hybrid has a lesser risk tolerance than somebody who invests in pure equity. So logically, one should have a lower risk portfolio, more, I would say, more inclined towards better balance sheet companies, more inclined towards larger caps. And more importantly, these days, I think the quality on the debt side has become more something to look at more closely. So look at the debt allocation of that particular hybrid fund. And if you see any name which is questionable also, I think at that time one should take a call that it's better to take differently equity and debt. But if you are comfortable with the holdings plus the policy of the way it is managed, I think that's how one should look at hybrid equity. And see, I myself manage the hybrid equity and equity savings. I'll just take 1 minute for that. In hybrid equity, while 65 to 80% is equity, the remaining 20 to 25%, I have very, very low corporate bonds. It's all government bonds, right? All AAA rated. The names are inclusive or names like NABARD, etc. So I'm compromising on the interest. So I have not taken risk on the debt side. So ensuring that when things become better, I'll take on the higher yields. Similarly, on the equity savings as well. So although in equity savings, we have slightly more space for the debt side, there also I do not have any risky names and we do not take any risk. The idea is that keep very low risk on the debt, because in a hybrid side, the debt side is for stability, equity side is for growth. And that's how I try to look at it. And if it matches your philosophy of putting in hybrids, I think that's the way we should look at hybrids.
Alok, if I say that instead of putting in a hybrid, based on the asset allocation and based on the risk appetite of the client, isn't it better that we allocate that much based on the risk appetite, we put that into debt and the balance can go into equity? And why to kind of mix both? Is that a way I can approach?
Yeah, there's nothing wrong in that approach.
Okay.
Absolutely fine.
Thank you.
I think thank you very much, Alok. Thank you, Rakesh, for.
Okay, mine. So I did see a question from Saurabh, which is that mine is a novice question. Can you talk a little about ULIP? So I am not a subject matter expert on this. I'm not sure Alok is as well. But I will tell you the little that I know of in ULIPs, and I'm sure your financial advisor is probably the best person again to answer this bit as well. But ULIPs are unit-linked investment plans, or the way you call them. These are basically investment plans that are bundled with life insurance products. It is something where there is a life insurance wrapper, which is built around an investment, and so you get the benefit. The client who invests into this fund gets the benefit of both investment and insurance. To me, it's not a bad option, but I always believe that a life insurance company is best at protecting people, and a mutual fund company is best at managing investment. I always believe that somebody who's good at something should continue doing that. So a ULIP is something which, if you have a very, very long horizon, typically upwards of 15 years, I think it makes sense. But if it's being sold to a lot of investors by whoever it is, it could be banks or anybody. But if it's understood by, let me put it this way, that if it's understood by you that okay, you're investing in it for 10, 12, 15% return, I think that's wrong. Because you take your break-even period in a ULIP is typically longer than any other investment, because it has an insurance wrapper around it, and hence the cost of insurance gets inbuilt into it. So my suggestion would be, if you want to take insurance, go for a pure term. That will serve your purpose. It's the cheapest form of insurance in the world. It's the most effective form of insurance in the world. You can probably take in a few riders with it and then continue to pay it for as long as you want the cover to be had with you. And once you reach your goals and once you reach financial freedom, if I may use that word, because that's the most important thing, you need not then probably have such a high cover. So that's the most easiest and the most prudent way to take life insurance. And the rest of the money you have, I would say put it into investments. So that would mean typically your mutual fund, stocks, bonds, so on. And that will actually serve the purpose of of both protection as well as investment. That's the way I would answer that.
Rakesh, quite well explained.
Smart SIP as well, because that actually combines both investment and insurance.
Yeah. Alok,
Yeah.
you were saying something? Sorry.
Sorry, I was just telling Rakesh to cover smart SIP because that's what
Yes,
is
I'm going
the
to do that.
new version of investment with insurance.
I'm going to do that as well. Yes. So, I would say exactly. So, thanks, Vikas, Alok, for that. So, we have an option called the Smart SIP, which is basically nothing but the SIP with insurance. So, any client who does a SIP, a systematic investment plan with PGIM India Asset Management, automatically gets a life insurance cover along with it, absolutely free of cost. There is no cost inbuilt into it. It works in a very simple way. For example, I'm investing 10,000 rupees per month as an SIP. First year I get 20 times the life cover, which is 2 lakh rupees. That is 20 into 10,000. So 20 times first year, the installment will be the first year cover. In the second year, that goes to, 75 times, which means in the second year, my insurance cover will be 7 lakh 50,000. And the third year, that goes to 120 times my life cover. So from the third year onwards, I will at any point of time be having a 12 lakh life insurance protection, which is built around my SIP. So which practically means that I'm getting the insurance at a zero cost. At the same time, I'm investing my complete money into an investment, which is continuing to grow. So for as long as you don't withdraw that money, the life insurance will cover till your age of 55. And I'm sure that most of us would aspire to create our wealth at least by the age of 55. Because if we've not reached that wealth creation by the age of 55, we definitely really have to think hard and much more serious in where we've gone from. But I think at 55 the insurance expires, and that's the biggest benefit of a smart SIP. So my recommendation would be, along with your regular term plan, it always makes sense to do a smart SIP because your SIP automatically bring in your life insurance cover as well. There is an insurance certificate which is given by Pramerica, Prudential Life Insurance, which will come to you, and that is something that you can keep, as a life insurance certificate as well, along with the SIP.
Thanks, Rakesh. I think that's the right approach. And as an advisor, also, we recommend that one should take life cover separately and an SIP additionally into equity. But I also have another view to ULIP. The way I sometimes look at it, uh, generally, when you take a ULIP, the client will stick to it because there is a compulsory lock-in. And he stops his SIP the moment he has certain other challenges. So sometimes we also recommend ULIP just because you will be more disciplined because you feel that if I stop today, I may lose a lot of money because there are charges which are extra on a ULIP product compared to a SIP. There are hardly anything. So then it makes depending that you are talking of a very long tenure, maybe 20 years, to make that
Correct.
discipline ULIP could be a good product, but again, it depends on a case to case, depending on the client's requirement.
Yes. I'm absolutely with you, because I think, like I mentioned in the conversation, I think over long periods, ULIP is a great product to have. And like you rightly said, it's in many ways a compulsory form of staying invested as well.
Absolutely.
We can take any other questions. Yes, Surendra, to anyone. If
We
by any
have one more
chance,
question.
yeah. So yes, if by any chance smart SIP transaction file, still the insurance cover will be failed. Still the insurance cover will be active. So if you can, there is a chance that in the entire tenure of the SIP, up to as long as there is no default in the first 3 years of your SIP tenure, your insurance cover will continue. So unlike the other three players, for us, in the first 36 months, you just have to ensure that not more than 3 transactions fail. So in 36 months, anytime up to 3 transactions failure is allowed, you can reinstate it and the insurance cover will continue. But after the third year, so I'm just giving you an example. For whatever reason, let's say if you're not able to pay for 1 year, and then you want to restart it later, you can continue after 1 year, but the insurance cover will continue to remain as long as you don't withdraw the money. I hope that answers your question, sir. So that was the last question that we could come across. And because Akash, if there are any questions which is there for Alok or for me, for us, we will be happy to take them. Whenever you get those questions collated, we'll be happy. Alok will definitely be happy to answer them, in whatever best way he can as well.
Thanks a lot, Rakesh and Alok. And thanks, Ritu, for organizing this.
Yes.
I don't see any more questions.
And so,
Maybe,
yeah.
yeah.
So thank you, audience. Thank you, the speakers. I think we will justify the value of each other's time.